I inherited 47 acres in Colorado from my grandfather. It was paid off and pristine farmland, a legacy of generations working the land. I hadn't set foot there in 3 years, but now I was returning with excitement and nostalgia. The winding dirt road that led to the property felt like an old friend, and memories of summer evenings and winter chores filled my mind. As I rounded a bend, the idyllic scene shattered. Across the open fields that should have been empty, I saw cranes and bulldozers, concrete foundations, and rows of houses under construction. My jaw dropped. Instead of grass and wildflowers, 96 glossy new homes with freshly sodded lawns and bright paint stretched out in neat rows. A big sign read, "Highland Valley Estates, luxury homes, only a few remain." I pulled over, confused and heart-pounding. I stepped out of my truck on legs that felt weak. The smell of newly poured concrete and fresh lumber assaulted me. Men in construction hats moved around, carrying beams and shouting orders. How could this be happening? How could a huge development be rising right where my grandfather's fields once lay? I remembered that the land was mine, fully paid off and free of any mortgages or liens. The physical deed was stored safely in my filing cabinet back home, proof of my ownership. But that fact did nothing to stop the reality before my eyes. Skyscraping walls replaced barns, and bulldozers replaced livestock. An overwhelming sense of disbelief and anger washed over me. The old ranch house where I spent childhood summers was nowhere to be seen, buried by townhouses and cul-de-sacs. My heart raced as I thought. This land meant everything to me, and now it felt like it was being stolen. Despite the chaos around, I forced myself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help. I took out my phone and began taking pictures of the development, gathering evidence. Each photo was like a dagger through my chest, reminding me that these were my fields being taken. Walking along the makeshift fence, I tried to process what was happening. Was this some mistake? Maybe the HOA had a backdoor deal? There were rumors that the local homeowners association, under pressure to increase tax revenue, had started this project without telling me anything. I remembered petty past conflicts with the HOA. They had fined me for trivial things and never approved any permit requests I made. It suddenly seemed clear, they had been quietly plotting their revenge. Breathing heavily, I realized the full scale of the situation. 96 homes on my land meant a small town, nearly 100 families, and millions of dollars of property value. If they continued, it would be nearly impossible to undo without huge consequences. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Then another thought emerged. Maybe, if I played this right, I had an opportunity. For now, I needed more information before acting rashly. I chose to keep moving, determined to figure out my next step. The next morning I returned to the small county building office to get answers. Inside, dust motes danced in the sun as I explained the situation to a clerk. She reluctantly handed me a set of documents titled, "Permit to Build, Highland Valley Estates." My heart sank as I saw my name scribbled on forms I never signed. It appeared the HOA had submitted paperwork on my behalf, but how? I could barely comprehend it. I leafed through the papers quickly. Every permit and approval, from grading the land to installing utilities, had my name on it. Yet I remembered never applying for any of these. The signatures were meticulous forgeries, their cursive just different enough that a trained eye would see it. It was clear. Someone on the HOA board had stolen or fabricated my identity in those documents, claiming legal authority to build on my property without my knowledge. Anger flared hot inside me. The betrayal cut deeper than any petty fine or argument we had ever had. 4 months they'd pursued me with red tape and harassment, and not once did they mention this behind-the-scenes attack on my ownership. It suddenly seemed so clear. They were hoping to sneak this development through under my nose, thinking I would never notice. Despite the fury boiling inside, I forced myself to stay outwardly calm. I needed a strategy, not an outburst. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath and remembered the advice of a family friend: never burn bridges, but always set a cunning trap. Right now, the cleverest move was to keep them building. Let them think they had one. I would quietly gather every shred of proof and plan my counterattack. That decision felt both risky and right. Letting them finish construction would make it harder for me to demand they tear everything down, but it would create even more leverage later. When the day came, I would stand before a judge with the genuine deed in my hand and those forged documents side by side. The contrast would be undeniable. Every plan laid by the HOA would crumble as soon as the truth was revealed. I spent the rest of the day quietly plotting. Instead of rushing off to sue or call the police, I chose to observe and prepare. Late in the afternoon, I drove around the perimeter of the project, noting every detail and entrance. The HOA thought they had outsmarted me. Little did they know, the real game was only just beginning. Days turned into weeks as the development marched relentlessly on. Every time I passed the site, more houses had climbed to their full 2-story height. The quiet morning I first discovered this mess felt like a lifetime ago. Now, the neighborhood was coming to life with rows of identical homes, each one a monument to the deception that started it all. Inside, I seethed with a mix of anger and nervous anticipation. Each new roof was an unanswered question. I had informed my lawyer about everything. We drafted legal notices and gathered official maps and deeds, ready to deliver them when the moment was right. But I didn't rush to file them yet. I wanted the opposition to believe they had won. That meant more waiting, more frustration, and more hiding in plain sight. One evening I quietly approached the edge of the development and found a gap in the temporary fence. I slipped through and walked slowly among the half-finished houses. The wood smelled fresh and new. On the wall of one house, I taped a handwritten sign on butcher paper, "Owner's property, do not trespass." By the time the workers arrived the next morning, these signs had everyone talking. I smiled inwardly. I was reminding them, and myself, that I hadn't given up the land. Inside City Hall at dusk, I pored over my grandfather's original deed. The parchment pages of the old document brought me comfort and resolve. That deed was my guarantee, my proof. The developers had forged many things, but they could never forge my family's legacy. I traced the signature of my grandfather and felt the weight of history behind it. My ancestors had worked that land in sweat and blood. I would not let their legacy be erased. Every move I made was quiet, calculated. The HOA had spent millions thinking I was gone. But I was still here, biding my time. I kept driving by at dusk and dawn, noting license plates and contractor names, making sure the timeline was documented. The sun rose one morning and I watched the final roof go on the last house in the development. 96 houses. Every single one of them had been built on my land. By then, I had assembled a pile of photos, documents, and notes that would shock any courtroom. I had become an expert in building permits and property law. It had been torturous to wait, but I felt a dark satisfaction. They didn't know what was coming. Weeks later, the day came. I sat quietly in the cramped county courtroom wearing my best suit, heart pounding. Across the wooden desks sat the HOA president and their attorney, faces smug and confident. They were all convinced this would be a routine hearing, another formality to rubber stamp their development. I was acutely aware of the hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line and the faith of my family's legacy. When my turn came, I stood up slowly and laid out my evidence on the table. There was the deed, worn but authentic, from my grandfather's own hand. I had copies of the falsified permits and photos of the finished houses, all carefully labeled. The judge listened as I spoke in measured tones, describing how I had returned to my land to find it transformed without my consent. I described the forged documents and how every signature was not mine. My words felt small, but the truth behind them was anything but. A hush fell over the room when I handed the deed to the court clerk. The ink on that paper was black and heavy with history. Across the room I caught the eye of the HOA president. His smug expression had vanished, replaced by disbelief. The attorney at the table looked like he wanted to crawl under it. Everything I had built inside my truck, evidence, was now laid bare on the judge's bench. I remembered my grandfather's voice in my head, telling me that justice might wait, but it would come. The judge examined the deed as if it were a relic, and I could sense the moment tipping. Other lawyers murmured, flipping through the stacks of permits I had provided. The contrast was stark, one true document bearing my family's seal, and a pile of phony papers. This was the moment I had worked toward in silence. I saw the ledger of lies start to crumble under the weight of plain truth. Hours later, as the late afternoon light filtered through stained glass, the judge adjourned the session with instructions that everyone would return the next day. The hallway emptied, and I left feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. I knew I had presented my case clearly. Now all that remained was the judge's final decision. The next morning I returned to court with trembling hands. The air in the courtroom was tense. The judge reviewed the entire scandal before him and declared the permits null and void. The deed was officially affirmed in my name. A cheer erupted in my head as relief flooded me. The HOA president slumped at the table, disbelief etched on his face. My family's name was finally vindicated. Justice had been served on paper. Following the ruling, the HOA had no choice but to abandon the project. Within days, inspectors arrived and notices were posted. The houses had been built illegally and needed to be removed. The heavy machinery that built those homes was now tearing them down, house by house. I stood at a distance and watched as my land was gradually returned to a barren field. It was painful to see perfectly good structures being ripped apart, but these walls were never rightfully theirs. By sunset, nearly all 96 houses were reduced to piles of lumber and concrete. Dust hung in the air around me. On a hill overlooking the site, I took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. I still owned 47 acres, truly mine again, with the sun setting over what used to be Highland Valley estates. The battle was over, but the land would forever bear the scars of this fight. The crisis was over, but life was far from normal. I walked across the wide expanse of my reclaimed property, the demolition scars still visible in the dust and broken boards. Despite the wreckage, a sense of peace settled in my chest. The eerie silence of the empty field was far preferable to the constant racket of construction. Now that this nightmare was behind me, I could finally imagine what to do next with my 47 acres. A few weeks later, with victory sealed in the courts, news of the decision spread through the valley. Some neighbors I had never met before came to thank me, their voices trembling with disbelief at the turn of events. Others who had planned to buy those homes were equally shocked to learn the truth. It felt surreal that their dream homes were built illegally on land that wasn't for sale. Nonetheless, my duty had always been only to protect what was mine. I eventually met with the HOA board and local officials to ensure nothing like this could happen again. They apologized profusely, some with genuine remorse, others with empty words. The HOA president, who had once ignored all my calls, now sheepishly shook my hand. There was no real satisfaction in their apologies. I had the law on my side. It seemed like poetic justice that they now had to deal with all the backlash of their actions. In the end, I decided to hold on to the land. I placed a single new sign at the edge of my property, brighter and more permanent than the scraps I had taped before, property of the original owner. This land would no longer be a quiet inheritance, but a testament to vigilance. I had been forced to fight to keep what was rightfully mine, and I refused to let it slip away again. Walking away from the dust, I realized something important. Even in the most unbelievable situations, patience and knowledge of your rights can turn the tide. The experience had shaken me, but also taught me to stand firm. My grandfather's legacy was intact, and my resolve was stronger than ever. As the mountain breeze swept over those 47 acres, I finally felt at home again, ready to build something new on my own terms.